And thanks to everybody for joining us yet again for another session on the GED exam. This time it's for math, as Tiara mentioned, and much of this content was first presented at last year's conference. But I thought that it really touched on a lot of high points for me when I think about math. As many of you know, if we've had a conversation about content in the past, I'm really not that shy about sharing with you that I just have had very few instances or experiences with math where I felt confident about it, especially growing up and taking all those required math classes every year at K-12. And that experience led me to taking more math than I really cared to do when I went to college, because I was one of those kids that needed remedial math, developmental classes to get to the credit bearing classes. And quite frankly, I would have preferred to have skipped all of it if I could. But, it's just, don't have a brain that is naturally wired to appreciate math and numbers and relationships between numbers unless we're looking at a sales ad. That was probably my favorite experience when I was in school, and I learned the magic of fractions and percentages, and really knew that clicked for me, and has really helped me take advantage of those sales when I need to go shopping or look for high ticket items, those kinds of things. And so I think for those of you who teach math, love math, have always felt confident about math more often than not, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you and the gifts that you bring to your students. And for those of you who teach math because, somebody has to do it, your students really need you and you're figuring it out, kudos to you as well. And I can't thank you enough. I think we all have those times and those stories with students that, it may even be the one reason they choose one high school equivalency test over another is how they feel about that math test, right? And so I really wanted to kind of touch on some things around math that I can identify with. And that really goes to some skills and strategies to think about our understanding of math vocabulary and how we can address that, but also math anxiety. I mean, I have enough anxiety right now just even talking about it. I might break out in hives, but I thought that those kinds of skills really will help us with math, but they are the kinds of skills that help us with every content area. And I think that's probably a theme throughout each of these weekly webinars. If you've been with me every week, that is one of the themes that I try to bring forward, is that we can really work to improve our students' proficiency across the content areas by taking advantage of high impact indicators, which really get to the heart of those thinking processes and skills development that transfer across the content areas. And I think you'll see that again today. But I did just want to take a brief moment to really think about what skills our students have or should have when they are looking at taking a high school equivalency test, and hopefully, in preparation for the GED. And we do have students that tend to be in that high intermediate basic education range, maybe that low adult education, secondary education range. These are defined by our NRS accountability ratings and measured by TAPE and CASAS and things like that as well. But, if we look at that middle range, students tend to be able to perform basic math operations with whole numbers and fractions, and can determine correct math operations for solving narrative math problems, what I grew up calling story problems, right? It wasn't just a simple equation to process. And they can, kind of convert from fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions. I thinking my own journey with math would feel pretty comfortable in that middle range myself. But we want to get them to where they're performing in that mid to high range And when they take the GED Ready test, they're able to pass the GED Ready practice exam with a 145 or better. If they're in the green zone, they're really likely to pass the math exam. And for those of you who have students who may want to take advantage of the online remote proctored GED exam, where students can take it from the comfort of their home rather than a test center, they do need to pass the GED Ready practice test at a 145 or better to qualify for that opportunity. And that's because they aren't able to retest online with the GED. They would have to retest in a test center. And if the test center isn't available to them in their area, then that could be challenging for them and kind of delay their progress towards earning their high school equivalency diploma. So we do want them to have as much confidence as possible that when they do take their test, whether it's at the test center or online, that they're pretty confident that they're going to pass, that they have proficient skills to do that. So here's just one example. The high impact indicator is such that we want to ensure students are able to calculate dimensions, perimeter, circumference, and area of two-dimensional figures. And of course, they have their I want to call it a cheat sheet, but it's not. Their formula sheet, excuse me. I think it's just late in the day for me today. So these are basic skills that will transfer to a variety of questions, but we want them to be able to understand the definition of perimeter and use reasoning skills to determine the value of X overall. So you could chunk this up a little bit into those shapes and get your equations that way and solve this kind of problem. But these are the kinds of things that they're going to run into when they take the math exam. These skills and high impact indicators come from the performance level descriptors, where this lives on GED.com. It complements the high impact indicators, and it tells you what skills that they need to have in order to perform in a particular zone. So not only do they need these skills that are listed in the red zone, but they need to work up to those skills that are also in the green zone in order to be successful. So we need to think about building better math skills in terms of modeling the thinking process behind solving those equations, developing the skills and strategies to do so, and giving them ample opportunities to practice. And there's lots of ways that we can do that. Before we dive in, let's think about all the things that math skills allow us to do. It's good for our brain, and it makes you a better problem solver. And it's all around you, especially, I'm getting to my favorite picture here, again, with those sale ads. That's really the day, and I was in middle school when it happened, when it really clicked for me that I could think about percentages in fractions and really probably the most complicated math I can do in my head without a calculator or scratch paper. So when we think about what we need, why we need math, it may not be that we feel like we're going to assume a career that is heavy math, whether it's engineering or construction, accounting, things like that. But there are skills that are taught when we are proficient in math around logic and the use of numbers that can be helpful in everyday life. Students who are proficient in math are able to explain the meaning of a problem and look for entry points to a solution. They can use assumptions and definitions and previously established results to construct arguments, and they can apply the math they know to solve problems arising from everyday life, society, and the workplace. They may be able to consider all available tools when solving a math problem or communicate precisely to others. And there's a number of ways where we can develop those skills. So when we think about learning and retention, today we're at a webinar, and essentially what is this? This is a lecture, right? We're not in the same room where I can engage you and we can practice some of the skills and strategies that I'm going to share with you today, where that kind of work together would give us probably at least 50% or better retention rate in terms of our own learning around these concepts. And the same is true for our students. If we're speaking to them, then chances are their mind's wandering as to what they left undone before they came to see us, what they need to do after they see us. It really begins to click when they're able to engage other parts of their brain through discussion groups that requires listening and thinking and speaking, practicing by doing and creating new ways of solving the same problem, and teaching others. And honestly, I really appreciated that the highest retention rate is achieved through this practice of doing and teaching others, because it is something that I leaned on quite a bit as a teacher. Selfishly speaking, at the time, I felt like there were some of my students who just sort of, had more credibility with their peers than with me. And you might have experienced that as well. I don't know, but we kind of need to think about all the different ways that we can engage our students and measure their understanding of these concepts. So to that end, one of my favorite strategies, and I don't care what content you're teaching, this is always a good strategy, and that is journaling in general. One, if they have any anxiety about writing, then they're going to get practice in writing in a variety of ways for a variety of purposes, to learn, to express, to share knowledge. As a teacher, if they're journaling what they're doing or how they're feeling with math, then I can begin to understand what their thought process is, not just in the emotional part of that, but also what was their thinking behind the way that they solved the problem. I know growing up, it was like, show your work, show your work, show your work, right? And if I didn't show my work, I didn't get full credit for the answer, because the teacher could see what I was thinking when I did that and find the mistake in my thinking. Well, journaling allows us to have the students participate in that kind of effort in a different way. So they might not be aware of what they're doing or what they don't know, but if you can read what's on the page after they have responded to a prompt, it gives you some insights into what they're thinking. And if they don't know what they don't know, you might have a better idea of what they don't know once you've read their response to a given prompt. It helps them make connections between real world and concepts that they're learning, and develop the ability to monitor their own progress, to communicate more precisely, which we want them to be able to do if they were to respond to an argumentative essay prompt, right? And sometimes it can just be helpful to express our feelings, like, today, this is just not working for me, right? So there are 3 types of prompts that could be effective when we're talking about journaling for math. One is those affective or attitudinal prompts, which really focus on students feel, on how students feel. Math content related prompts will help us focus on what the material is about. And the process prompts allow us to require students to explain what they are thinking and doing. So that can give us insights as well into how they feel about what they're learning and what they're actually learning, and give us an opportunity to identify ways in which we need to correct their thinking behind the process we're trying to teach them. So just some examples of that. One secret I have about math is, and give them a sentence starter. My worst experience with math was when, And it might be, you know, kind of interesting for them to see how you would respond to these kinds of prompts as well. And maybe take that time, if you're to give everybody, you know, 5 minutes to respond to one of these prompts, and you engage in writing as well, they are seeing someone in your role as an instructor writing. So you're acting as a mentor in that way, but then also sharing allows them to understand that someone who is highly proficient and competent at math also has some of these thoughts. Or seeing your response in to a process prompt might help them identify where they went wrong in their own explanation, or affirm for them that they were right in what they were explaining, that, you know, they double checked their work, you had a similar thought process that they had, and that can be really affirming and build confidence as well. So these are just some examples. You can take this PDF, and when I owe Tiara a couple of PDFs, we just are challenged by the size of the slide deck, but we'll figure that out. And then you can use these kinds of prompts, or even use this PDF to generate some writing as well. Just some examples of how you can incorporate journaling into your lesson plans and instructions real quick. You can set the stage for positive writing by making early activities easier. Really just kind of setting the stage for why you're engaging them in writing, because after all, this is a math class, right? We're supposed to be working with numbers as, you know, more than writing. And certainly for those students who are more comfortable with numbers than they are with words, the art and practice of writing is going to be helpful for them too, using a modality that they're confident in, using the math content for that. So we also want to see what we can do about helping students think differently. If you think about this quote, students often enter a math class with about as much enthusiasm as one brings to a root canal procedure. Have you seen that? Have you felt that? This particular quote certainly spoke to me. I thought, you know, I can really identify with that feeling, because, you know, just walking through the doors, I immediately feel really inadequate when it comes to math. And so engaging in activities that will help boost my confidence is really particularly appreciated. There is one way we can accomplish that, and that's by using brain teasers to develop reasoning ability. Because if you think about it, and you think about the high impact indicators we've discussed previously around critical thinking skills related to the RLA exam and social studies exam, that really speaks to developing those critical thinking skills to process the skills and abilities to work through a math problem or identify the most appropriate solution. And so brain teasers can really engage a student's mind in that process and give them an opportunity to play and have fun with math. Using humor can increase interest and motivation and decrease math anxiety. There are some examples. So a little boy goes shopping and purchases 12 tomatoes. On the way home, all but 9 get mushed and ruined. How many tomatoes are left in good condition? At first glance, I want to subtract 12 from 9 and get 3. But what I really need to do is read very closely. And it says on the way home, all but 9 get mushed. So how many are still good? Well, the answer's in the sentence, right? It's 9. And so I didn't want to include too many of these, but give you a couple of examples. There are more brain teasers online, of course. And this one at first glance too, I was just listening to someone else deliver this presentation one time. And I read it really quickly, and I was like trying to do this math in my head, because of course I didn't have a calculator. And, you know, eggs are 12 cents a dozen. How many eggs can you get for $1? Anyone thought about it? Because here I am going, trying to divide 12 into a dollar for some reason, but it already told me that there's 12 cents for a dozen, right? And so that makes them a penny each, and I can get 100 eggs for that dollar. I want to find that grocery store, right?
Yeah, me too.
Oh. So, like I said, there are more brain teasers online. I needed to abbreviate some of the examples a little bit to ensure that we had a chance to talk about all the different parts of improving math proficiency. And so, have fun with that. Your students could really use a breath of fresh air sometimes with something a little less serious than some of the materials we present when we're really serious about math, right? But again, having a background in teaching ELA, building math vocabulary can really help develop those skills. And I will admit there was a time when I was certified to teach math. It was part of a generalist certification that I had re-earned, and the principal could have had me teach it. It wouldn't have been in anybody's best interest to have me teach math, but under the rules, I was certified to teach it if there was a gap in the staff for that class. Unfortunately, they found somebody else to do it. But then I had the opportunity to work with students who needed accommodated testing. And I realized as I was administering these tests that half the battle was just understanding what they were reading to figure out how to solve the problem. And so it really clicked for me that there are some things that I might be okay at when it comes to teaching math, and certainly vocabulary is one of them. So what would happen if the words were missing from this chart? If we just took some of those words out, would we know what to do with them? Kind of curious, right? Because if I were to remove them, it might say like trunk dimensions in inches on tree 1 and tree 2. And so if I really wanted to help someone begin to understand what it is they're reading so that they can think about the process in which they're going to solve the problem, then I really need to think about identifying vocabulary, words, and terms that are important to facilitate that process. And if we think about, I'm just going to move forward past this one more time. If we think about academic vocabulary, and we're really looking at tier 2 and tier 3, right? There is some high utility academic vocabulary that's found across all content areas. And then there's content specific vocabulary that would be at the top of that pyramid in tier 3. Tier 1 are those everyday words that most students know. We learn them through conversation. I tend to use, think of it as social conversation. When I am working with someone who is not a native English speaker, I know that their social use of language is going to be so much more proficient than the academic use of language, depending on where they are in their own acquisition of the English language. And the same would be true for me if I were learning a language. I would, be able to converse socially, with those peer interactions much quicker than I would be able to read and respond to any form of academic language vocabulary in another language. So as an example, here's some words that would, vocabulary words that would translate across all content areas. And they're action words, right? They need to be able to understand what evidence is, argument, explaining or developing. Spending some time on vocabulary words like this list can really help facilitate understanding and being able to demonstrate proficiency across all content areas. But as an example, there's also, there's some math vocabulary words that they also need to know. Proportional gain and numerical expression, profit and property. To this day, I could not tell you, and I'm sure someone on this webinar could tell me in a hot minute, but I don't know what additive inverse is. I can't recall a time when I've heard that, and it's certainly not part of my everyday language. There is a website, and we've included the link down below, where you can actually get this list, but you could also simply Google academic word list, and the site with these kinds of vocabulary words would come up for you as a resource in your classroom as well. One of my favorite ways to develop vocabulary is using the Frayer model. And so with this, you would divide a piece of paper in 4 squares or in quarters, and you put the word or symbol that you're trying to understand in the center, and then you want to define it, list characteristics or facts about that word, list non-examples, and then examples. And this is true. This is a really good model to use for any academic vocabulary list in any content area. So just as an example, a question mark is, so if I were to ask you the term that is a number with no fractional parts, that is a number but has and has no fractional or decimal part and can be positive or negative, and you see the examples or non-examples, what word comes to your mind? Was it integer? We can ask students to engage, especially on words that they're going to get a lot of bang for the time spent on this, to create their own models for understanding. Or we could do the reverse, just like this slide, and start creating some and then have them identify, given all the information available, what is the term that matches this definition and these characteristics and examples. And then we should probably think about watching for obstacles and opportunities, right? There are several math misconceptions. You could probably make a long laundry list of them. There's 5 here as an example. And one of my favorites is number 3. Which fraction is bigger, 1/3 or 1/6? Or if we're not really competent in our use of and understanding of what a fraction is and how they're used and how they represent numbers, we'd be tempted to think 1/6 is greater than 1/3, because after all, 6 is a higher number than 3, right? So it must be a bigger fraction, when in fact it's 1/2, right? It's much smaller. So this is a great exercise for you to use with your students. I would have fun with you on this if we were, in the same room. But developing math fluency can also be incredibly helpful. And when I think about math fluency, it made sense as to why I spent all that time on flashcards developing, basic understanding of addition, subtraction, and multiplication. But also that, I don't know if anyone else had this in their learning history, but it was very common practice when I was in elementary school to have timed multiplication tests. How many multiplication problems, single-digit multiplication problems, can you answer in a minute? And if you could answer 100 of them with 100% accuracy in 1 minute, you were considered highly proficient and fluent in your multiplication table. Well, this particular math fluency exercise requires you to fill out these equations. Here's the hint. It also identifies who is reading instructions and who isn't? Who is aware of the instructions and who isn't? How many of you, if you saw something like this and it was, just handed out as an exercise, would be tempted to go, oh yeah, I know what 17 times 2 is, or I know how to, 8 plus 2 is 10, and you might start solving the equations, right? However, the directions actually provide more details and reverse some of those operations. So if you can see it, I'm not quite sure how many of you can, but it does say in the following simple math problems, a plus sign means to multiply, a divide sign means to add, a minus sign means to divide, and a times sign means to subtract. Complete the problems. So if you were to share this with your students as an exercise, it would immediately identify who are those in your class that are going to read directions and who aren't, right? And sometimes that's half the battle, is really paying attention to what we're being asked to do to solve the problem. Now, I grew up with, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, PEMDAS. That is how I learned the order of operations. But in practice, it may not be the best way for our students to understand order of operations. It may be that GEMS encourages them to solve those equations more appropriately, in which case they would look at groupings of numbers first, solve for exponents, multiply or divide from left to right, and then subtract or add from left to right in order to get the correct response. And then we can get a lot of mileage for our students in reinforcing the basics. So if we are looking at fractions, the pie model would look something like this, right? We have a whole circle, that means we have a whole pie. And we can divide that pie in half. We can divide it in thirds, fifths, sixths, etc. But if we're trying to help our students understand the connection between 1/2 and 1/3, or 1/4, and how it really looks in terms of determining size and portions, then I would suggest that using fraction tiles or a linear chart allows them to see those relationships more clearly. It allows them to see the sizes and differences in a way that a pie chart just simply can't conceptualize for them. So, which is more, 3/4 or 4/5? Well, we can figure that out by finding our 3/4 and our 4/5 to help illustrate that for them. And then it becomes more clear because not only do they have the numbers, but they have the visual representation as well. They can see that relationship much more clearly. We can also use a multiplication chart for more than just solving the multiplication problems. They can use the line on the diagonal to identify squares and roots quite easily. They can use a multiplication chart to identify fractions and lowest common denominators, and really get a lot of mileage out of a tool that they have probably seen before in their learning. If we were to think about algebra, the key differences between likely to pass and the red zone are when students have a much smaller skill repertoire, they tend to be able to work with equalities but not inequalities. So that would be like a red zone or a low performing score. They would tend to have weak graphing skills and are far less able to apply math skills to real world situations or interpret real world skills mathematically. if we can remember that arithmetic is doing something to numbers to get an answer, and algebra is exploring the relationships between numbers, so algebra equals relationships, we can begin to sort of think about how we can help our students gain a better understanding of algebraic equations as well. And truth be told, I mean, I took algebra more times than I care to count, to be honest. But I never really thought about it in terms of relationships. I can't recall a time when that would have been true for me. And so that was sort of enlightening for me as well, as I began to consider how we can help our students have a better relationship with math in general, and certainly with algebra. So there's going to be some differences in what these symbols mean depending on whether or not we're doing arithmetic or algebra. That equal sign, for a math equation is, it's the answer, right? When we see that, we know that what follows it is the answer. But in algebra, we all probably know that explains an equivalence between two quantities. Same with the plus sign. We might think of that as an addition operation, but it helps us understand if that's a positive or a negative number in algebra, if there is a plus or a minus sign in an algebraic equation. And so these kinds of relationships and symbolic vocabulary are the kinds of things we need to ensure that our students also understand when we think about academic vocabulary. There's a couple of resources I wanted to share with you so that in hopes that your students could have more fun with math. It's called Math is Fun, and they have brain teasers and puzzles and different things like that that can help just give you something fresh and new to work with your students and give them an opportunity to see math in different ways. I'm just going to pause because I have not really paused for questions a whole lot this time. And I just want to check. Looks like we're good. Everybody was checking in. Some of the resources that we talked about, such as the performance level descriptors and the high impact indicators, are of course on GED.com. I've mentioned that before for the other content areas. So you can certainly use that as a resource to really look at finding those high impact indicators that would help your students accelerate their learning. There is also a study guide for all of the content areas, but I find the study guide to be really helpful for students to understand the skills that are being sought after and measured when they take the GED exam across these content areas. And it's really explained in layperson's terms. So it makes the information a little bit more accessible when possible. Does anyone have any questions? Any thoughts? We are a quiet group, aren't we? Well, I'm going to stay on just in case something comes up. I'm not seeing anything yet. But I do, again, want to offer my email and phone number to you. Feel free to reach out at any time. I'd be more than happy to make myself available to you and answer any questions you have or any thoughts you have on the GED exam. If there's anything that we can do, I would appreciate the opportunity to take that back to the team for sure. But certainly feel free to give me a buzz if you have any questions or thoughts or need some clarification, not just for math, but in anything in general related to preparing your students for the GED exam. For those of you who are curious about the online proctored test, we have had about a half a dozen students just from Mississippi either schedule appointments or take the exam. As of yesterday, I had not noted that anyone had earned their credential from taking it online just yet, but I am looking at that on a regular basis. That would be exciting. And initially, we were in that phase 1 and 2 zone where we were reaching out to students who had had a test canceled as of March 1st and had not been able to reschedule. So they had basically first dibs on the opportunity to test online from their home. And we have just recently moved into the next phase of that, where anyone with a GED ready exam where they scored in the green zone can take advantage of testing online from their home. And so that will be expanding over the next couple of weeks as well. But I just wanted to give you some insight on that as well. It's not intended to replace local test centers in any way, shape, or form. It's actually intended to just support your capacity, because most test centers I'm speaking to are not able to serve the same number of students as they were before. And so we wanted to make sure that that was available to them. And I did get a question on that in terms of, is the price the same for the test at home? And for GED, it is. It's exactly the same price. So there's no added cost to them. They do need to have a laptop or desktop with a webcam, and they need audio or sound. So whether it's internal, external speakers, the proctors need to be able to see them and to hear them while they take the test. So, but there is no price increase for that. And other than that, I didn't have any other updates for you. We have plenty of time. I actually was more diligent in sort of focusing this webinar a little bit more because I felt like in past weeks I crammed a lot in there. We didn't have as much time at the end. So we certainly have plenty of time for questions. But it's a question, can the student schedule online, or will they have to call? They can schedule online. However, the way they get access to scheduling the online test is they have to take a GED ready practice test, score in the green zone, and then they will have access to the registration page for online proctored test. But they don't have to call customer service. And that's all done through their GED.com accounts. And I would also mention, in case I haven't recently, GED Ready, if your students have to pay for their own practice test, we are running a promo through the end of the month for a 50% off discount. If you are a program that you purchase vouchers for the GED Ready practice test, you're going to get a better price through your third-party vendors that you buy those vouchers from. But for anyone who has to pay for the test themselves, it is at 50% off through the end of this month. So it might be a good time, because if they do schedule or pass in the green zone, they have 60 days to schedule their test.
There's one more that just popped up, Jonna.
I did see that. So the question is whether or not this is a permanent change. And we will, for the foreseeable future, be offering this option. We are not making any decisions ourselves about ending it. With one thing that I think COVID has taught us is that there's a lot of unknown around it. Like, how soon will the vast majority of us be able to engage in person, in closed spaces, in large groups, those kinds of things. It's just unknown, right? So we have the service. GED is available for remote proctoring, and whether or not it is permanently available in large part depends upon, is really a state decision. And so we'll be having those conversations over time, but everything is so new right now, it's hard to say, but we will continue to offer it. And like I said, it's not at all intended to replace the local test center. certainly we want folks to be engaged with their communities and their local test centers and fill your seats. But if you find that you have students who are, at risk for COVID, at a higher risk, or maybe have family members that are immunocompromised and fit those high risk categories, but want to move on in life, this might be a good solution for them for the time being. Or if you're finding that, you aren't able to offer as many seats as you were before, and you're not able to serve everybody, then it's an alternative to be able to take the test in a timely manner. So just some options there, but definitely not at all intended to replace you, but to support you. You're always going to get more than you bargained for with me. So that was probably more than the answer you were looking for. Okay, well, Tiara, I don't see any other questions, but I'm hanging out for another minute or two just in case.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I know you said you'll send me the PDFs, and I'll just include that because of the issue we're having with the size of the file.
Right. I think, not to digress too far, but I think I might have to I don't know if this is possible. I was going to shoot you an email. I might have to just split the deck in half, like part 1 and part 2.
Oh, that will probably work. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
First 2.
Thank you, Shannon. I heard you. I can't thank everybody enough for hanging out with me again on a Thursday afternoon. I really appreciate it. And I am looking forward to the day when I can see you guys in person. So hopefully, by October, we'll be able to do that. All right, take it easy, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.